and welcome to the 313th episode of the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And we have a really fun show for you today. We're going to be talking a lot about Thread. This could be called All About Thread or All About Eve, because Kevin is going to tell us about his experience with the Eve sensors. We're also going to be talking about Apple's HomePod Mini, some sensors inside, maybe a potential future, and again, more Thread. Masonite, which is a company that makes doors, has done some really cool stuff. We're going to be talking about that. Peloton has made some acquisitions that have come to light recently. We're going to speculate a little on that future. We've got news from the radar front from Vire and an AI chip company that has raised a lot of money. We'll also be answering your questions about Wi-Fi, because that is the number one question you guys send to us. And our guest this week is Carla Diana, who is the author of My Robot Gets Me: How Social Design Can Make Products More Human. So we're going to be talking about some really fun, I'll just call it, how we're going to interact with our robotic friends in the future. All of this and more await you. But first, let's get a message from our sponsor in here. Today's show is brought to you by Smart Charging Technologies. This is a company that developed the Switch Always On. It is a smart IoT DC micro uninterruptible power supply that is designed to improve the power reliability and connectivity of your networking devices. The most important thing I learned about it, this particular device can be used to remotely turn your router on and off so you can reboot it over the internet. That's a big deal that y'all definitely have asked us about. You can learn more about the limitations of existing power solutions and how you can build resiliency in your IoT applications by reading their white paper. Go to staceyoniot.com/power to download the report. All right. Before we get into Thread, we got to tell you about Cricut. Last week, we talked about Cricut, which was the crafting device that did this whole, hey, we know you bought this, but now we're going to make you pay a subscription. And then they were like, well, we won't make you pay the subscription unless you buy it after December 2021. And now they're like, you know what? We're not going to make you buy the subscription. So they just full on took everything back. So if you have a Cricut machine, relax. I would expect them to try to start maybe some more monetization efforts in the future, but for now, you're good. All right. We're shifting things around a little bit. Normally we do our product reviews at the end of the show, but there's such a thread running through these. Oh, so bad.
I can't believe you went there.
So unintentionally awful. Anyway, there is a line running through all of these stories, so we figured we should just lump it all together. And I'm going to let Kevin take it away because I have never heard him this enthusiastic. So Kevin, tell us about your Eve products.
Yeah, and I'll preface this by saying, as excited as I get about the smart home market, systems, devices, I still have healthy skepticism. And yet, after using 3 new Eve devices, some of which will be available later this week, others in April, I am blown away. I say in my review of the Eve weather-connected weather station, the Eve energy plug, and the Eve door and window sensor that this is the future of the smart home. And I know that sounds hyperbolic, but I truly believe it. So let me just quickly go over what the devices are, because the devices themselves are not groundbreaking and new. The Eve weather station, again, this one is $70. It will be available later this week. And it does what the old weather station did. There are some improvements. It has, just like the old model, an IPX3 water-resistant display. It has 3 sensors, so you get temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure. The display is improved because instead of having to toggle through to see different metrics, you see them all on the screen at the same time, which is fantastic. Other than that, the addition of the Thread protocol support is new. And I'll get into that probably more towards the end, because that is common to all the devices. If you're familiar with Eve Weather, you know it's your local weather. The app shows you trends of temperature, pressure, etc. I wouldn't call it a weather system because it's not predicting weather to a real...
Well, it sort of does. And
more trends, but go ahead. I know where you're going.
Yeah, so I thought it was neat because they use barometric pressure to basically anticipate, like, is it likely to rain? And then they'll stick a little rain cloud in there. And I thought this was good because this doesn't connect out to the broader internet. And that's worth noting because, again, we're thinking about privacy and that sort of thing. And I like the fact that they have decided to not connect it out from a privacy and data control perspective, but they're still trying to give you a little bit of insight into what comes next. And I think it shows kind of a lot of promise. And if you think about things like, hey, how far can we push machine learning on these edge devices? How far can we push our predictions at the actual edge? I think it's kind of cool.
And that's fair. That's fair. And there's a big privacy push here. Specifically, it's front and center by Eve to say, hey, your data is your data, and we're not going to send it out, do this, do that. That's fair. I guess I'm spoiled because I've used the Dark Sky application for years, which is hyper-local weather, and I get actual, like, it's going to rain in 7 minutes and so on and so forth. That's crowdsourced information and all that. This is giving you the weather at your place, your location. But again, because it's barometric pressure, it's only going to tell you what the trend is. It's more likely to rain today. It's more likely to be sunny today. So I guess it's setting expectations, really.
Yes.
Is what it comes down to.
It's no dark sky.
It's no dark sky. And that's fine. That's fine. The second product that I'm using is a smart plug. It's the Eve Energy Plug. This is the newer model that goes on sale for $40, I believe April 6th. So within 2 weeks, you'll be able to purchase this one. This doesn't really have any new functionality over the old Eve Energy Plug. So if you're familiar with that one, it looks the same. It measures device consumption. It will calculate how much energy is being used. It uses a national average, but you can change that to whatever you pay for electricity. So nothing fancy there. But again, you get Thread compatibility, which again, we'll get into a little bit more. So, it's a smart outlet and it works with HomeKit, works with Siri, or the Eve app or the Home app. We all know what a smart outlet is. So again, that the product by itself is not groundbreaking. It's going to be the Thread that we'll talk about. Lastly is the Eve door and window sensor. This is actually an existing product that is Thread capable now. So if you have one, there's a firmware update. I assume you can get that firmware update now, or they sent it to me early. I do not know, but there's a firmware update that will enable Thread inside this. It's your standard door and window sensor, magnetic closure and open, $40. It's a little pricey, but again, you're getting Thread support, so I think it's worth it. You even get in the Eve app when it was open, how long ago it was open, what times it was opened or closed, whether it's a door or window. It keeps track of all that information. You can do automations with it, and I did one on my own, and then I showed Stacy how quick, and this is going to get us into Thread and really what these products are all about. I showed Stacy by removing the magnet from the sensor how quick my office lights go on. And I've done that for you before in the past, but what did you see this time?
It was so fast. It was like instantaneous. Yeah, I can't tell you how quick it was. It's just, boop, it's on.
I would equate it to flipping a wired switch. It is that fast. It really is. And this applies to all the devices that I just talked about and or any other future Thread devices. So let's, I guess, now talk a little bit about Thread itself in the implementation here and what it means. I'm just so impressed that these are my first Thread devices, and having 3 of them is really useful because it's not just one product where I'm like, oh yeah, that's pretty good. All 3 products have impressed me because of the connectivity. Now I do have a HomePod Mini, which is Thread enabled, and that acts as a Thread router. That we should probably talk about what the different pieces of Thread are.
Yes. All right. So 3 different levels of, I guess, capability from a network perspective. There is a leader device, or we'll call it the brains. In Kevin's case, it would be his HomePod Mini. In most people's case, in HomeKit would be the HomePod Mini. And this is the router that connects out to the internet, so Wi-Fi, and also helps direct traffic. To that, you can connect another level of router capable devices. These are going to be things like the Eve switch that has wired power. And you can connect 32 of these to the master brain router.
They call it the border router.
Yes, they call it the border router. And this middle layer of router basically just passes traffic along to the endpoints or edge devices. And those, you can have 512 of those attached to any one of the middle level of router.
That's a lot of devices.
It is. And those are for sensors that don't have the extra power to pass along messages. So, all your door and window sensors, things like
The weather, right?
yeah, the weather, anything like that. So, yeah, you get a lot of devices. It's a very smooth kind of topology, I guess. And you can actually see that in the Eve app, which is pretty cool.
Once people get this, if you go into your settings in the Eve app, there's a view thread network, and it provides information on all of the thread devices. It explains which ones are which types of devices, and that explains their capabilities. It also tells you if they have good or average or bad throughput for inputs and outputs for message passing. So you get it's not a topology, it's kind of a line by line, just a breakdown, but it's still very helpful to understand how Thread works. So about Thread itself, we talked about the nodes, the parents, the children, and all that. It's self-healing, and I tested that because, well, I didn't mean to, but I did, because the battery that came with the Eve Weather just kind of died really fast, and no big deal. I mean, it happens. So I replaced it. So when I removed the old battery and put the new one in, the Weather obviously was lost from the Thread network, came back in less than 30 seconds, just took care of itself. I didn't have to set anything up. And that's the beauty of this. I didn't have to set up this mesh network for my IoT devices at all. It just happens. Once you connect these devices, and there's a border router, which in this case, again, is the HomePod Mini, it just handles everything. It just does it, and it just works. Additionally, I tested the range of these. I took one of the endpoints, which again was Eve Weather, took it outside. Well, it was outside on my back porch. I took it out front, and I started to go get my mail, and I could walk about 60 feet away from my home to the point where I was just about losing my Wi-Fi mesh network. And I have the Eero Pro 6 mesh network, very good capabilities, very good range. And the Thread device was able to stay connected pretty much to the edge of that. And I guess that makes sense because they both use 2.4 gigahertz, right?
Yes, they do. And so that does make sense. And
it's far better than Bluetooth.
Kevin, you are now no longer excited about Bluetooth, is what it sounds like.
No, I think the Bluetooth SIG in terms of the smart home has a major concern, or should have a major concern. They probably already did. I mean, they know the capabilities of Thread. It's out there for everybody to read. But when you experience it, that's when you get that aha moment. That just like, wow. It's like when people have had the aha moment of Wi-Fi mesh networks in their homes, and I'm sure most people have, it's the same thing, only it's just for your IoT devices. It's just like that. It just works. The latency is minimal. And I think that's because Thread, unlike Bluetooth, which tries to be everything for all devices, Thread just wants to do one thing and do it well, and that is connect smart devices. There's no codecs and profiles. Well, there are profiles, but it's not audio. It's not transferring files. It's not video. Bluetooth tries to be so much. Thread just, again, does one thing and does it so well. So when I say I believe it's the future of the smart home, that is why.
Big endorsement there for Thread. And I agree. It was created for the smart home, for this particular use case. And that makes a ton of sense. And it's also, I would be remiss if I didn't say, hey, this is what we're talking about doing Project Connected Home over IP. That is going to work over Thread. It will also work over Bluetooth, which is good because that means you can buy Thread devices and hopefully still have your existing Bluetooth devices still function.
I should note these devices will work over Bluetooth as well. So if you don't have a Thread router device, and again, right now for HomeKit, it's only the iPod Home Mini, you can still use them over Bluetooth, but it's not going to be the same experience.
Right. Well, and Eve is only for HomeKit. So now upcoming devices will have Thread in them. So the Nest Hub that we talked about last week that they announced, that's going to have Thread in it as well. I expect Amazon to introduce Thread into its products.
Probably through the Eero routers.
They used to have Thread. They presumably still have a Thread radio that's not turned on. And they also have Zigbee in there. And the Zigbee underlying radio is the same underlying radio that Thread works over. So there's a lot that can be done with over-the-air updates. Not for the older stuff, but for the fourth generation stuff, I would be shocked if that did not support Thread. Okay. That is a lot of Thread talk. Let's talk a little bit more about the HomePod Mini, because it reportedly, according to iFixit, has a temperature and humidity sensor, which you've got in the Eve Weather, but the rest of us might like like to have. This is a feature that Amazon introduced in the Echo 4th generation. Google is introducing a temperature sensor in the, again, upcoming 2nd generation Nest Hub. This makes sense because, well, Google's saying they want to use it for tracking your bedroom temperature while you sleep. I think, and this is crazy, but I think what it is it's going to be the ability to use this in conjunction with like a connected thermostat that speaks the same protocol, like Thread, and has the HomePod or whatever as the brains. What you get is a better understanding of temperature in your home that can actually be used to control your thermostat or control additional automations. And maybe one day, y'all, we can eliminate the thermostat on the wall. I know.
So a thought here, I hope they do enable this at some point because I use the Ecobee, which is HomeKit supported, and it has the wireless sensors. I have one extra one in my bedroom. My office gets really hot because of my computers, and I don't have a sensor in here. So I'd love to have it in here. And I'm wondering because border routers in Thread can work with non-Thread. They can bridge non-Thread networks. So even if the Ecobee I have only works with Bluetooth, it's still on my Wi-Fi network. I'll bet that if they turn on that sensor, this will still work, even though the Ecobee is not Thread.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it could. I'm with you. That's kind of the promise. So we'll see. I know I'm thinking like way far ahead here, and it is nice. I will say that I do ask my Madam A in my bedroom, I'm like, hey, what's the temperature in here? And it's always a little cooler in my bedroom than it is out there. So, okay. And then other Apple news. Kevin, you have been complaining that, it lacks a display. It makes you sad.
We wrote about this 2 weeks ago, why the HomePod, the big HomePod, is being discontinued. And there's a lot of reasons. We went over them 2 weeks ago or a week ago. I forget which episode. But it highlights that Apple's missing out on smart displays. And then again, I know people say, well, that's the iPad. And again, I say to that, if you've never used a smart display, you don't understand the difference between a fixed, always-on device and a mobile computing device. Because the iPad is a mobile computing device. It's not always plugged in. Could be being used when, something happens in your home. Your kids are playing a game on it, so you don't get the notification, etc. So yeah, I do think Apple's missing out on not having a smart display.
But we're seeing rumors from our buddy Mark Gurman, who is pretty good at Apple rumors.
Oh, yeah.
He notes that Apple has been developing speakers that are equipped with screens and cameras, and we might get a HomePod device with a built-in display for FaceTiming and other things. So
I say HomePad.
HomePad. Oh, no. But a pad feels like it could move around.
Well, an iPad can. But a HomePad is one for your home.
Okay. So maybe we'll have a HomePad. Alrighty. Let's talk about doors. I know. You're like, what, Stacy?
Okay. Are they HomeKit doors?
They might be. Not yet. Okay. A company called Masonite. It's a very large company. They, many years ago, their founders figured out how to turn scrap wood into a new wood product called Masonite, and they make doors and other building supplies. On Tuesday, they announced that they are building, we'll call it a smart door, but they're bringing power and internet connectivity to doors, and then they're integrating Ring devices and Yale locks into these doors. So this is not a product that, you theoretically, I guess, could go to your Home Depot and buy it. But this is really a product for the builder market. And the idea here is when you're building a new home, you would bring one of these doors in, you would wire it to the home's power, and then you have an integrated smart lock and doorbell camera, basically, that you don't have to change the batteries on, you don't have to worry about, because it's already built into the door and the door is powered. You could have great sensors like open close sensors also integrated into this. So this is what they're announcing. It is worth noting that the person who's behind this is Corey Cerise, who longtime listeners of the podcast may remember because he helped Chamberlain develop their strategy around the smart home and was integral in the MyQ launch and development. And the MyQ is actually an excellent device, one of my faves. So this deal to me, I don't know how to think about it. Like, I'm disappointed on one hand because I'm like, it would suck to have a home, you come in and you're like, well, this is the door lock you have to use. But then I'm also like, well, it wouldn't suck if we had something like Chip that makes everything easy to work with other ecosystem products that we want, right? So that would be okay. But if you don't want to do like the Ring doorbell, then you probably don't want this door. It's not like you can swap it out. So those are the kind of things that I'm like, I don't like it. But when I think about it as a non-smart home person, like just a normal person, I'm like, oh, who wants to think about like before Ring, how often did you think about your doorbell at all, right? So there's plenty of people who don't, they just take what they've given and they just accept the feature. They don't care about who it's from.
A lot of these types of relationships start out with a new product, this new door that is powered and makes it easy and it's integrated with the Ring and the Yale. But eventually that company says, well, we're kind of limiting our audience here. We're finding out not everybody wants to use those products. Let's just sell the connected door with the wiring, et cetera, and let people put in whatever they want, right? Over time, that tends to happen, quite honestly.
And my friend Leo Des, who is the creator of the Inside Newsletter, which is a newsletter all about the access control business, so thinks doors and security for homes and businesses, he actually pointed out that this is also going to be a big move for people in the distribution chain, because what this does is traditionally lock vendors they would be sold in like Home Depot or sold to builders individually. But now what happens is anybody who's not part of this door, if they choose this door, they've been cut out of the arrangement way upstream in the value chain. So that's a big deal for everyone who isn't Yale right now. So this is interesting. We'll keep an eye on it, and I expect we'll hear more about it in the week to come. Now, let's move to fitness. Peloton. Peloton has bought a bunch of companies, and people are excited because it bought a custom voice integration platform that lets you make your own voice control things. We're like, okay. But what we were excited is it bought a company called Otari and Atlas Wearables. And Otari made a smart yoga mat, and Atlas is a company that I've known about. I wrote about it back in like 2014 when I was at GigaOM. They were an Austin company. I went and met the founder. They made a wearable device that tracked your movements and personalized. They did machine learning, basically. They personalized your workouts for you based on your movements.
And they log them that way too. You don't have to log what you're doing because it can tell based on the movement what you're doing.
Yes. So it was like, oh, you're doing push-ups. And then it could use that information to be like, do 4 more, come on. So this is really interesting because this is kind of this is a new way to attack the problem like Mirror, or what is that company that has the
Tonal?
Tonal, yes. It has like a full-on weight system that is connected, and it tracks both you and the reps and everything you're doing. But if you could do it with a wearable as opposed to like this massively installed, I think it's like $2,000 system, this is a far better way to do it, a far cheaper way to do it. And so I'm really fascinated by like the moves that Peloton's making here.
And for those people who are not familiar with Otari, you said it's a smart yoga mat. It's an interesting product. It started out on Indiegogo and it has a display so that you can follow along with your yoga instructor. But more importantly, it has a camera that measures 17 of your joints, basically the angles and so on. So it's basically telling you real time if your pose is correct, accurate, etc. So there's a lot of smarts in there. And I'm trying to figure out if Peloton's going to just, add a new wearable and add a new yoga mat, or they're going to try and integrate more some of these technologies into what they have. It's going to be interesting to see what they're doing.
I feel like the data capture here is what's interesting in the algorithms that they've developed. And if you can actually use the camera on your smartphone or your iPad or whatever device you're using to view the classes, and you can pay extra for the personalized coaching, we're almost to the point where you can work with the devices that you already have in your home, as long as you can convince people that the service itself is good and that the data you have is valuable. So if I were running around picking companies to buy, I would be looking for, again, the service and killer data and killer algorithms that really can translate into a service, not a product.
Yeah, people are willing to pay for services, but it's got to be a big value add. So that's the key, I think.
Yeah. All right. Moving right along. Let's talk about, I think this is neat. Vayar, I can never remember how to say it. This is an Israeli company that does a radar chip. And you guys know it's radar. Yay, Stacy. This is the fourth week in a row we've talked about radar because radar's time is coming, y'all. So
But it's either that or Lutron. I mean,
yeah.
Pick your pick.
We've been on a downhill slope on the Lutron front lately, but we'll get there. They announced a system on a chip that can sit in the ceiling or like the dome light of an SUV and track how many people are in the car. And again, they're doing it via radar, so it's not a camera. And they're positioning this as, hey, you could actually use something like this to track if someone has left a baby in a car seat, which is a horrible example, but unfortunately it happens. So things like that, or in case of an accident, you could see if there are people still stuck in the vehicle. I'm sure you could do other things with it, like with heating and cooling. If no one is in the third row of the SUV, maybe you don't run the AC back there. Anyway, the idea here, the two things I like about this are one, radar. Two, it's less intrusive than something like a camera, but it's possible you could use radar to detect things like driver sleepiness, which is the same thing that Amazon is actually trying to detect with its workers and delivery drivers that is causing such a kerfuffle right now because people don't want to be on camera all the time while they're working, which I get. Something like this could be trained to look for certain attributes that indicate sleepiness, but it wouldn't have someone being on camera.
Yeah, more private.
So it's slightly more private. And, I'm not Amazon, so I don't know. I'm a big fan of radar over cameras, personally.
I was just going to say, cameras are great for video chatting and or home security. Anything else, if there's an alternative solution that can provide the same type of service where you don't need a camera, but you need to know that someone is there or someone is falling asleep, or I definitely prefer a non-camera solution such as this.
Yes. Okay. And then our final news item this week is FlexLogic. This is a edge AI chip company. They have announced a $55 million funding round. And I just wanted to bring this up because they make an AI accelerator chip. So this is going to work in conjunction with existing silicon. They do something called a probabilistic computing, or they call it low precision in-memory computing. But basically, this is super fast acceleration for a large AI model. So you could use this in conjunction with that, makes it faster. You could do predictive maintenance. You could do you could track like the entire operations of your factory floor within a model like this. And yeah, just worth it. It's yet another company that is doing edge AI. This is a bigger board than like TinyML, but it's pretty powerful. And we'll see if it gets adoption. All right. I think that's enough news. Let's take a moment and go to the Internet of Things podcast hotline. Dun, 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 dun. This week's hotline is brought to you by Very. Very is a fully distributed IoT engineering firm helping you get your biggest projects fully operational, on time, and on budget. Discover what Very's multidisciplinary teams can do for you at www.verypossible.com. All right. Remember, it is almost the end of March, but if you would like to win a smart speaker of your choice, you should give us a call at 512-623-7424, and you will be entered to win for this month's drawing. And man, we'll answer your Wi-Fi questions, but y'all have a lot of Wi-Fi questions.
They're very similar, and I get it. And Wi-Fi, and especially as you start adding gobs of devices, it becomes maybe a management nightmare in your head. I totally get that.
So let's hear, this is one of the questions we got. It actually applies to a couple of the questions. So let's hear our question from Sam.
Hi, Stacy and Kevin. This is Sam from Cleveland. I have a question about network audits, I guess. I have a lot of IoT devices, cameras and sensors and so forth on my home network. I'm using a Google Nest mesh network. And I was wondering if there's a way to do a audit where I can easily grab all the device names, IP addresses, MAC addresses, and which node they're connected to. I know I can do the one at a time, but I have so many that it's hard to keep track of. Is there a way to somehow capture all that into a single document so that it can help me manage and monitor my network? Thanks so much.
So I no longer have a Google Nest mesh network, but from what I recall, you can view that information, the device names, the IP addresses and the MAC addresses, but you manually have to go get them. I mean, if you want to do that and put them in a spreadsheet, that's fine, but I don't think that's ideal. IP addresses may change. The MAC addresses certainly won't. I don't know that you want to try and do that manually, and I don't think there's a way to do that in Google Nest. And even with the Eero that I have now, I can see all that information. I can't export it. It just manages it for me. So again, there's no way to do it in Eero.
And the Ubiquiti routers will show you a network map that has all of that information. To me, it is a feature that if any modern router should have the ability to see both the MAC addresses and your IP address and the MAC addresses for all of the devices on your network. Again, not sure what with the exporting feature, what you're after there. So
yeah, I mean, Sam says he wants to manage and monitor his network. So here's what I'm going to suggest to Sam. And unfortunately, there's a cost involved. I would take a look at the Firewalla product line. Now, we've reviewed 2 of their 3 products, and the products vary in cost. The middle one is the Firewalla Blue that I first reviewed probably about 2.5 years ago. It's $179. And that will do all this for you with reports, with notifications. It'll do more than you want, actually. It will tell you where all of your data is going, what server it's going, the IP address of the server, the country location of the server, everything. It's really robust. The limitation is that the $179 Firewalla Blue only supports network throughputs of about 500 megabits per second. So if you, like me, if you have like a gigabit connection, you may notice a network slowdown. If you have a faster network and you want even more features, the Firewalla Gold is what you want. That supports the 1 gigabit per second transfer. That's $418. That may be overkill. I don't know, what your budget is and what your specific needs are. Both of these products even offer a no-cost VPN. They actually act as a local VPN server. So that way when you're out and about, you can connect to your home Firewalla and route all of your remote traffic through it. Or you could use it at home as a VPN server. That's up to you. So there's no charge for that. But that's going to help you monitor your network, your devices coming and going. I will say with the Eero, I do get notifications when a new device joins the network.
And you can look at your traffic history.
You can. There are some, as Sam has noted, there are some add-on subscription features that give you even more of that data. But I find it pales in comparison to what Firewalla provides.
There you go. And yeah, so those are some options. And if you want to see a real-time network map, then something like Ubiquiti will do that. But those are very expensive, but very capable routers. And then one other thing, just to address another question that we've gotten a couple times related to Wi-Fi. When you change your Wi-Fi router, you can change the password for the router when you have a new router. If you have a lot of IoT devices, you should probably keep your SSID and your password for the network the same. Because when you have 50 devices and you change your SSID or the network password, what's going to happen is all of those devices are going to fall off and you're going to need to re-add them.
One by one.
Yes, one by one. And that's why it's so important to actually use your guest network. Because only you as the administrator and honestly, if I had kids, I'd put my kids on the guest network. So if you want to be the type of person who changes the network password for everybody every 6 months, I would think of your network then as only you as the admin has the actual SSID and password. And then everybody else gets a guest network access that, stays stable for X amount of time before changing. So that's a strategy I would say for anyone going forward. You're going to have to do it once when you change your SSID and password to create this more secure setup. But that's how I would handle that.
With router testing, that's exactly what I do because, I've changed routers 3 or 4 times in a year for testing. I don't want to reset up all of these smart devices.
Exactly. So if you're in Kevin's neighborhood, the SSID is, this is Kevin Tofel's house, and the password is, I am Kevin Tofel.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh, yeah. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 password. Okay. Well, that is the answer for you, Sam. Hopefully that helps, and good luck monitoring your network. And remember, if you have a question, you can call us at 512-623-7424, and we would love to answer your question. Plus, you'll be entered to win a smart home speaker. Okay, that concludes this portion of the show. Please stay tuned for our guest, Carla Diana, who is a former mechanical engineer and product designer who's going to be talking about things like, hey, should we be anthropomorphizing Madam A? And ambient information. So stay tuned for this. It's fun. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and I have a return guest for us, Carla Diana. Hello, Carla. How are you doing today?
Hello, Stacey. I'm super psyched to be reconnected with the podcast.
Yeah. So, y'all, we're talking to Carla this time because she is about to launch a new book called My Robot Gets Me: How Social Design Can Make New Products More Human. And as you might guess, Carla is a designer. And Carla, do you want to just go through a quick, what you're doing now, some of the products you've worked on, and your overall philosophy? Because I don't want to put these words in your mouth, and I think you do a great job.
Yeah, well, thank you. So let me tackle those in order. So what I'm doing now is, well, I've just completed the book. So thanks for mentioning that. My Robot Gets Me, and I'm very excited about it as a project and to talk about it. But it is a culmination of my work, which originally started in mechanical engineering. And then I shifted because I really wanted to focus on the human side of everything and the creative side to industrial design, which turned out to be a focus really on the design of connected devices. So I have this real passion for the ways that the physical and the digital intersect, and working on physical things that have some kind of digital behavior. As part of that, I currently serve as head of design for a company that is called Diligent Robotics, that is developing a robot to assist nurses in the hospital setting. That's their current product. So I've been working with them for a number of years and had worked previously with their CEO in research settings at Georgia Tech and at the University of Texas in Austin, which is another little connection for us there. Woohoo! Woohoo, Austin. And I co-host a podcast with a fellow named Dr. Tom Goriello that is called the RoboPsych podcast. And Tom is a PhD psychologist, and I bring the design point of view. So I have the podcast, the book just coming out, my design work, and then the other synergy among all of those things is I share my excitement through teaching graduate students. So I have a group of graduate students at a program at a school that's called the Cranbrook Academy of Art. And our program is called 4D Design. It is a program, a department of my own creation. I came here 3 years ago to launch it, and now it's underway. That's what I'm up to.
See, this is why I did not list all this, because it would have just gone on and would not have been enthusiastic. And basically the theme here is you think a lot about how our electronic devices interact with us. And when we've talked in the past, I think we talked about, robotic vacuums. And I think I've complained about how every single item in my house makes some sort of chiming noise.
Yeah.
In your book, you actually talk about some of that. You even talk actually about how to use light in design and considerations there. So we're not going to get into all of the things that you talk about in your book because there is a lot. But I did want to kind of start off with this idea that I, for example, do not anthropomorphize my digital assistants, or I try really hard. I try not to we call her Madam A on the show, but I try not to call her a her. Oh, but I just did.
Oh, you just did. I know, it's so hard. So hard.
But in reading your book, it was freeing because you're yeah, it's all right to anthropomorphize things. That's what we do as people. So can you talk a little bit about your thinking behind turning all of our robots into people?
Yeah, absolutely. I referenced studies from Georgia Tech that looked at people's proclivity to give their Roombas names. It's always been remarkable to me because as a designer who had come from the world of the field of social robotics, which is an intense academic field, I knew that the Roomba was not developed to be a social robot and has, frankly, very little intelligence relatively. And yet we have a human desire to interact, to want to be social. We crave the social. And I think, it's especially acute now in the midst of the pandemic. But I don't think it's a sickness or a oddity or something to be ashamed of. I think it's something that we can embrace. Now, anthropomorphism means a lot of things. So I, on the one hand, believe that we have a social relationship with many of our products, and that social relationship can be designed on purpose in order to enhance the usability of the product, and as well as enhance our just delight with it, to give us a joyful moment during the day. I do not believe that we should make every single product as close to being a little person as possible, right? And I'm hugely not in favor, that's not the right way to phrase that, but of let's say the deep fakes or what was happening with Google Duplex, or designing robots that have arms and fingers and eyeballs just for the sake of mimicking the human form. So when I say anthropomorphism, what I'm talking about is a very abstracted anthropomorphism. It may be something as simple as the microphone that's sitting in front of me just turning towards me when it knows I'm approaching, or turning towards the person who happens to be speaking at that moment. And that small gesture, I believe in small gestures and glimpses of social interaction.
Okay. And I think this gets into, you kind of danced around it, but I'm going to try to call it out. One of the fears about anthropomorphization, this is a terrible word to have to say a whole bunch of times on a show. One of the things that people are worried about is we have a human response to other humans, and it feels like some of these products might manipulate us a little bit. I don't want to say into being nicer, but we do things like when a Girl Scout shows up at your door selling Girl Scout cookies, you're not going to slam the door in her face, right? And maybe you don't know she's selling cookies. Maybe a small child's at your door. You don't slam the door in their face. You listen to what they say, even if you're not going to buy the cookies, but really you're going to buy the cookies. So yeah, with these products, it feels like if we treat them as humans, maybe we'll elevate their recommendations. Maybe there's just a greater chance to manipulate us. And I think that's, I don't know, is that a legitimate fear?
Yeah. As a designer, I really treat this social aspect as part of the palette. And in doing so, I have a lot of exuberance for its potential to make products great. Like the title, how to make new products more human, with the assumption that that's a good thing. But I do also, in the book, lean towards, I'm a big believer that designers should have a strong sense of ethics and be aware of what the work they're doing is leading towards and what the ultimate goals are. And I think what you're talking about is a really important caution, because what comes with what I'm calling social design is an enhanced ability to persuade. And in doing so, we can be persuaded to purchase more of a thing that's not good for us, soda and cigarettes and or things from a certain brand that, we may be then encouraged to purchase instead of other things, or just to purchase at all. I mean, I got kind of mad at Alexa the other day because she tried to push product on me in some subtle way. When I was just asking for the time, asked me if I wanted to look for gifts. Ooh, did I get mad?
I have had that moment. I have actually yelled at Madam A in that exact, I felt so betrayed. I literally yelled.
I did too. I said, Alexa, please do not do that again. So I think it's something that we need to be aware of. There is the potential for what we might call social engineering. And as a designer, understanding to what goal that social engineering is leaning, I think is very important. In addition to that, there are products that are going to serve by design or not what I might call vulnerable populations, which would include people like children or people with cognitive disabilities. And I think that as designers, we need to be extra aware of what's happening in those circumstances, as well as build in education. In some of your writing and your podcast, you talk about educating kids. You had one of your newsletters, which I thought was a really, really important message, as well as transparencies around, what I talk about, the way that things communicate through light and sound and motion. There can be indications that a product is listening or not listening, or taking in data or not taking in data. It's incredibly difficult. It is new territory for designers and manufacturers. And I think it's a really important topic.
Yeah. And let's just, before we get into a bunch of the other ideas in the book, let's talk about this. For example, you talked about Madam A and how it does a really good job of showing that it's listening once you speak, but it's not very good at indicating that it's listening all the time for you to speak. Can you talk a little bit about that and how kind of designers should be thinking about privacy?
Yes. So one of the things I talk about, and I think this is a perfect example of the kinds of things that designers can be thinking about in terms of transparency, is, for example, with an Amazon Echo, if a person walks in the room, you don't know necessarily that it's listening. Once you speak, there's a brilliant and really well-crafted interaction that happens where you say the wake word and a light ring starts to glow, and it actually starts to glow stronger in the direction towards the person who is speaking or the person who's being listened to, let's say. What it doesn't do, and what I talk about a little bit in the book, is, let's say I've invited someone into my space. That person is not aware of what devices I have in my home. If you were to think about a person, sitting in the corner of my room, just listening to us and not acknowledging us, that's a little bit the equivalent of what's happening when there's a device that is actually going to be listening and is not letting us know that it's listening. So there could be something like just a subtle tone or a subtle glow that lets you know when you enter a room that there is a device with a microphone that is picking up your speech.
Yes. And I think a couple weeks ago, I talked with Mark Ronson over at Argo Designs about this idea of creating a privacy, the ability to walk into your room and say, privacy, please, and your devices would trust that they would turn off. And it gives you a very seamless, easy way to get that privacy, which is kind of another option. But yes, I think we need that. I think you're onto something there, Carla.
Yeah, it's going to be tricky, right? If we've all got many devices already that have the potential to do this, and we don't want them in our faces. And I know this is something that you talked about at the beginning of this conversation. We don't want everything beeping and buzzing and saying, "Hey, I'm here." Hey, it's not like a friend who wants to engage with us. It's more like a lovely cat that sort of stretches to let you know that it's there. And there are many, many interactions. And We're not always going to be educated as to what sensors are in all of our devices and what we're supposed to know about them. But I think we can work in that direction.
Well, let's get into some of the core ideas that you have in your book, probably the core idea, which is how to think about social robotics. You have a 5-layered kind of Venn diagram looking thing. So it starts with presence in the middle. It ends with an ecosystem. Can you run us through those 5 points and kind of talk about what they mean?
So yes, so the framework, it's sort of a Venn diagram. It's a little bit more like an onion where you have layers on top of layers. And so there are ideas that build upon one another. And the reason that I bring this framework into the book is because it's very complicated to think about connected products. And it is a traditional approach, an attempting approach to think in silos. You have your industrial designer over there who's working on the shell of the form. You have your UI designer over there who's working on text on a screen, and everyone's working separately. And then there are marketing folks and engineers who are working on the guts. And in the book, I really talk about the importance of everyone on a team thinking about social design as the core North Star, if you will, to aim towards, regardless of what aspect of the team they are a part of. What I encourage people to look at is to look at all aspects of design in this layered approach. And so the core of it is around what I would call presence. And this has to do with the physical artifact. And we talk a lot about how electronics are becoming smaller and smaller and are disappearing into our walls and furniture. But, what those walls and furniture are is still, I think, very important and essential, and how they relate to us as human beings and how they relate to the body. So presence has to do with thinking about a sensitivity to the form and materials. So something like a kiosk in an airport gives you a sense of reassurance that the brand has some presence, that there is something that will greet us. And it is a silhouette that relates to our body in a certain way that we know we can just approach it. We know how we're supposed to be welcomed by it. We know how to interact with it. And the second layer above that would be is called expression. So in expression, we think about the way that a product can give us messages. So that's where we get into the modalities of light, sound, and motion. And a product can express itself. We think a lot about screens, and lately we think a lot about conversational agents that, like we were just talking about Madam A, that can say, the time is now, and would you like me to add this to your list, and things like that. But as we have more and more of what we might call social products, we really don't need everything to be screaming at us or to be talking to us or to necessarily have a verbose screen. So as a designer, thinking about this shorthand of having a product communicate with us through light or sound or movement is, I think, a really essential way. So the third layer is then interaction. So we have products that could tell us things, right? They can give us a glow to let you know. Like one of the things that I developed in my studio as a concept product is a coat rack that can just show me a number and a cloud if I need to bring an umbrella. But then we also have sensors that can know that what's happening either from a person interacting with the product or something in the environment. So the interaction chapter in the book has to do everything with the way we interact, obviously. And it starts to become then this two-way conversation. So not only does the object express itself with light, sound, and movement, but then it can read our movement and our gestures as well as our voice and whatever we might type into an interface. Then a layer above that is context. So context is really starts to be quite critical when it comes to sensitive social design. And a lot of the book challenges the reader to think about social norms in a really natural way, and thinking about designing products that understand us without us having to give them codes or type things into a keyboard. And then the final layer in the framework is ecosystems. And this has to do with the way our devices interact with one another. If there are 5 things knowing that they're not all beeping at you with different tones at the same time, and that there's some synchronization happening among them. I could go on and on, but that was a pretty long answer.
So let's go back to kind of where we are today instead of going where we hope to get, and if we'll ever get there. But do you think we made, I don't want to say a mistake, but one of the things I took away from this is we should be interacting with the products themselves and less with our screens, in part because of, I don't know, the cognitive load associated with that, and maybe the types of interactions we could have would be better. But do you think that using the smartphone as a mediator between our products and us, is that just like a necessary step to get to better products, or will we always be doing this?
Right. Well, yeah. As a designer, a lot of the premise of the book is I'm a little bit anti-screen. There's a really important essay around calm technology by a fellow named Mark Weiser that's many years old. But I think that this is an important goal. I really think that we lose ourselves to the screen, and there is a lot of cognitive load, and especially having a child in my life, actually, I'm called on it a lot, and I can see myself needing to do simple things and losing myself to the screen. And I think that a lot of those interactions can be offloaded to our natural physical environment, and thus letting us finally look up and look at one another. So I think that's the holy grail, and it is idealistic, and it is an ambitious one. But instead of me pulling up a menu on an interface and digging deep and navigating my 100, I know you're like me and you have 100 plus apps. And I think it's ambitious. I think designers are especially important. There might be this tendency to think, everything's just happening again with technology and it's disappearing. But what's going to make products more successful is when they have a sensitivity to what I might call existing archetypes. And, we understand a wooden table. And if that wooden table suddenly becomes smart, we should still be able to interact with it as a table, and maybe, wrap our knuckles on the table, or maybe, run a finger along the table, and not necessarily have to bring up the table on a screen and type in commands.
Yes, I am definitely done with having an app for every single object in my life. It's not fun. Okay. Well, Carla, we have talked about a lot of things, and I really appreciate you coming on the show this week. I encourage everyone, if you're designing products, if you're even, thinking about user interfaces broadly, not just for smart products, but any product, people could benefit from My Robot Gets Me, How Social Design Can Make New Products More Human. It's available for pre-order, and it'll be out on March 30th.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad to reconnect with you and to bring up some new conversations around designing connected devices.
That's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, if you'd like more IoT news, sign up for my newsletter at stacyoniot.com. We'll see you next week.